Hi everybody, I'm Jonathan Fields with another episode of Good Life Project. My guest today is Christina Rasmussen, who's the author of a really fabulous new memoir called Second First. And it's a story of profound loss followed by an extraordinary journey back from that and a different lens on the world. So it's so great to be hanging out with you today.
So good to be here, Jonathan.
So, I mean, it's so interesting. We're hanging out in New York City, and we've known each other for, I guess, a few years now, probably, right?
Yes.
As you were sort of exploring the whole book process. And now this book is out. It's making huge waves. It's being received extraordinarily well, and it's touching a lot of people. The journey it's based on is not happy, hunky-dory. So take us back and give us a foundation. Where does this all come from?
First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing my message and my mission. I chose grief a long time ago as a master's thesis in my 20s. And I said to my professor in England, I studied in England, and I said to her, I want to know how to help people get through devastating loss. And she turns around, she says to me, you're so vibrant and so full of life. Why do you want to do something like this? I said, I love the people in my life so much that if I lost them, I don't know what I would do. And I want to know how to do this. So I did my thesis on the stages of bereavement in my 20s. I volunteered at hospices. I sat with the dying. And then I gave birth to a daughter and she died. And then my 35-year-old husband died. And I realized that everything I was ever taught about grief had nothing to do with reality. And I was blown away. I died when he died, and I didn't know it because I got to keep my body. We go through so much inside of us and we keep walking on 2 feet. I didn't understand how the world could not help me. I was the alien living on planet Earth, and everyone kept walking around as if nothing was wrong. That nobody has ever said anything about the duality of loss. Everything changes inside, and everything is the same on the outside. And we break when that happens. We literally break in half. And every single person on this earth has gone through or will go through this experience, hands down. And nobody knows what to do with it. So
to experience such profound loss in a short window of time, like you said, it's so interesting because nobody talks about this.
Yep.
I'm blown away that in your early 20s, you had such a deep focus on it. I mean, what was it? I want to talk about the story, and I want to talk about your husband and this loss because it's a deep part. But I'm really curious because to be that drawn to the exploration of grief at your age, where you feel like you're invincible, is really unusual.
You feel like you're invincible, and I did experience a broken heart a couple of times, and I took it so hard, but nothing like what happened later. I was fascinated by it, and now looking back, I don't know if this is gonna sound right, but maybe I was chosen for this, and subconsciously I knew I had to do this. I was blown away by people's pain and how they survived it, and sitting next to the dying and giving them ice chips. And I mean, this is life, Jonathan. And nobody talks about those things. Nobody does. When I lost the baby, and she was born and she died after 12 hours of labor, and she died, and I was so confused. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand what was happening. It is the most confusing experience. You don't know, everything changes and nobody can help. Really, and I'm gonna keep saying this, nobody could help me. You try the best you can to move forward, but then the stages of bereavement meant nothing to me. Okay, so I was angry, so I was in denial. So what? How can that help me move forward? It didn't.
Yeah, so you have to start to find a new way. Tell me a little bit about your husband.
So he was, I think he was amazing. Apparently he was a gifted person, always went to a gifted school, and was a senior architect at Novell, a company that he worked at the time. ran a huge team, and he worked all the way to 10 days before he died. He wasn't going to stop. He fought for his life. I've never seen anyone fighting for his life. When I have a bad day, I just think of him, and I'm like, okay, this is nothing. We're good. I remember at the ICU in 2006, that's when he died, the doctors called me in a room and said, we want to show you something. And I said, what is it? And they showed me the scan of his lungs, filled with tumors and cancer. And they said to me, we do not know how he is still alive. And something else is keeping him here. And I remember looking at his lungs, and there was no space for air. But he was breathing, Jonathan. He was still here. And we had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old at the time. I had no job. He was the person bringing in the income in the family. I had just received my green card, so I wasn't allowed to work before that. And everything was upside down. And one day, in the ICU, the doctor said, it's time. Are you ready for this? And I didn't understand what he meant.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah, it's time. I said, what do you mean it's time? And it's time for him to go. And about 10 doctors came into the room. It's a university hospital in Boston, Brigham's and Women's. And they were going to give him morphine to slowly let him go. And he opens his eyes, Jonathan, looks at them and says, let's rock and roll. Let's do it. I haven't spoken about this in a long time. I don't talk about it in the book either. They pressed the button, and he said to me, get the girls. So I went and got the girls. He said goodbye, and that was it. And he went. And I'm not gonna cry.
So where do you go from there?
Well, you could never, no matter how much you expect him to die, we knew he was gonna go. You can never be prepared for the journey back to life. And I remember him dying, and I said goodbye. And I was sitting next to him for I would say 15 hours, apart from a couple of visits to the bathroom. And I had to get up from the bed, and the walk from the hospital room to calling the funeral home, letting them know. That was my bridge from this life to the life that I was gonna have. And I remember the walk, and I felt my body completely, like a heavy weight that didn't want to go. And I went, and I didn't cry for about 4 or 5 months, Jonathan. I couldn't. It was beyond tears. And I went back home, and I had told my 6-year-old that the next time you see mommy, daddy would be gone. And I want you to know that. I prepared my kids every day. And I walked in the house, and she saw me, and she started to run. And halfway through, she remembered. She stopped, and she cried adult tears. I never seen a child cry adult tears. There was this difference. She remembered what that meant. And we began a different journey since then.
So how?
How? Well, I didn't know how. And my parents wanted to stay with me and help me. And I told them, no, you're going home. And home was a long way. I was in Boston. They lived in Greece. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to do this on my own, and I want you to leave. So they left. And I started on my own, me and the 2 girls. I went back to school. I went and got a job, and no babysitters, no nannies. once a week, every Thursday. Someone would come and I would go to sit at the bookstore and read for a couple of hours, but that was it. No help. And I know it sounds crazy, but looking back now, that was me plugging into life again and trying to get strength. You know, you're preparing for a marathon, you have to train. And I was training to do this on my own.
I mean, so many people would want everyone around them.
Yep.
All the time. And I guess one of the awakenings is that there is no one path which is right for everybody.
No.
There's no one way to process this.
No, there isn't.
So you start to rebuild. And it's not just, I mean, you're rebuilding your life, you're also career.
Yes, everything.
And you're a mom of 2 kids.
I no income.
Right.
Not only I was in love with a dead man, and I wish he was there, and I missed him a lot. So that was one very difficult experience. And then the other one was, how am I going to raise my kids?
Just real world.
Yes.
How do I pay the rent?
So it's you cry. Well, I didn't cry for a while, but you're upset, and then you are, okay, now I need to figure this out. I need to wake up. I need to do this. And so when people say to me, you work so hard, you're doing so much, I mean, this is easy for me. I have done so many things that are much harder. So I went back to work and at the corporate world, and I had a 25-year-old bossing me around, Jonathan. Oh, talk about going from one bad thing to the next in a little cubicle. So after having gone through all this, I went and sat in a cubicle with a 20-something-year-old telling me to input data in a computer. You can lose your mind in that moment in time. And it all began, slowly back.
There are a lot of gaps that are.
There are, yes.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not, it's interesting. You're sitting here right now and you seem very together. And obviously, this was a while ago and you've had years and time to process it and you've developed an entire career now.
Yes.
Largely around this.
Yes.
You mentioned that you'd never cried for 4 or 5 months. What was it that made you cry eventually? Like what was there something that just kind of opened and said, it's time?
I couldn't cry, and I remember standing at the funeral and speaking in front of all hundreds of people were there. And the casket right next to you, I mean, experiences, Jonathan, are beyond words, right? And I stood up there and I gave this amazing speech and everyone was crying. And I was like this. And I said goodbye to him there. And then months went by and I remember I couldn't understand why I cannot cry. I was so devastated. And one day I came back from work and the girls were angry. And the first few months I would pick up the girls in the car and they would kick the back of the seat. They were just angry. They're really good kids, but I mean, they lost their dad. And I got home and I tripped in the house. I just tripped. And I hurt my foot. And I really hurt. And I sat down and I started to cry. And I couldn't stop. And that's how it started. Something hurt me physically. And the girls they sat right next to me on the floor. Mommy, I'm so sorry for your foot. I said, why are you crying? I said, I'm just hurting so much. And I didn't want to tell them it's because I was so sad. And then I cried. I cried at nights. I had nightmares, repeated nightmares that someone was going to come and take my kids away. Afraid in a house all by myself. So many things were happening, and I slept the lights on, all the lights on, bathroom, living room, TV lights, computer for months. Could not turn them off. Too afraid.
Of what?
Everything, ghosts. I was traumatized with what I experienced.
So how do you? I mean, at the same time now, there's the practical side.
Yes.
You got to work. You got to work for the 25-year-old in the cubicle processing data.
Yes.
But you got to process too. You've got to find a way back.
Yeah. Yes. So I did.
Everything that you had studied, everything you had trained.
Yes.
Real world, it's not helping all that much.
No.
So where do we go?
So one day, it was a year and a half after, I lived in Boston, a lot of snow, and I had this private driveway that would take you all the way to the mailbox, and there was so much snow that, I don't know if you heard this story before, but no, the mailman could not access my mailbox, so I couldn't get my Christmas cards. So one day I said to the girls, let's go shovel. So we went and shoveled, and I made all this beautiful space for this mailman to come by and drop off the mail. So I go back to the house all the way up the hill, and I wait to see if he's gonna stop, and I see him just driving by. I had two choices in that moment. That's how everything began. It was either to sit back down on the couch and cry and say, not only my husband died, I'm alone for Christmas, I can't even get my Christmas cards. And go into that grief mode. I mean, it was a terrible life. It was terrible. Or put on my snow boots and start to run after him. And I ran for 4 blocks in the snow, crying like a mad woman. And I got to him, and imagine this crazy woman arriving next to the mailman, and I'm like, you didn't drop off my mail. He looks at me thinking, there's a crazy woman here. Well, you didn't shovel well enough. I said, I did the best I could. And he turns around and tells me, you could have asked your husband to do it. I said, I would, but he's dead. So now give me the mail. The man just went white. He gave me the mail. I never missed my mail since that day. And I started taking charge of my life. I went for a promotion at work. I went on a date. I started asking for what was mine. And I started to plug into the life that I wanted to have, and not using grief as an excuse not to have it. And slowly and surely, I created the life that I have now. It was not easy. It was certainly not easy, but was very worth it. And now I teach thousands of people how to, I call it the reentry process. That's what the book is about. It's the reentry.
So how do you make that transition professionally?
Professionally?
And personally.
Well, 2 things happened professionally. After getting the job that I wanted in the corporate world, I had an office. I had this really great job. I decided that it was time to let it go and go back and get everyone else. All these people that are suffering. And it was always going to be like that. One day, in the middle of the night, I was upset and I was crying, and I said, there's got to be something better. I don't want to go back to this job. I really don't. And I was online and I was Googling, and I said, chapter 2. Go to domain names. It doesn't exist. 2nd chapter, no. And then the words second, firsts just hit me. I write it down. It was there. I bought it and parked it. Because I didn't, second, first, what is that? And about a year after that, I was telling someone about it, and she screamed when she heard the words. She said, you better go and grab that back and use it. And she was so enthusiastic about it. Sometimes we create something that we don't know how magnificent it is, because it came from us and it's the same as us. And I didn't know. I had no idea. And I went back and looked at it a bit differently. I'm like, second firsts. Your first, second time around. It's not bad. Looks nice online. So I claimed it, and I went and studied neuroscience as a coach for a whole year. Became certified as a coach because I didn't think having the master's in counseling was enough for me to help people. And then I slowly but surely created my own process after seeing so many clients, and not only for me identifying through my reentry process, but really seeing them and seeing how they did it, how they were getting back many, many times over, and what were the obstacles, what did they struggle with. And one discovery I made, and when people read the book, the number one thing they tell me is that they never knew they were in a place between 2 lives. We're in a gap. Millions of people in this world have found themselves in a gap between 2 lives, the one they left behind because of a divorce, a loss, a job loss, whatever that is, and the world that they're yet to experience. So they're in a place that I call the waiting room, and they wait.
Limbo.
What's that?
Limbo.
Yes, it's a gap, but they don't know it's the gap. They think that's their second life, and they think that's the way it's supposed to be hard and it's supposed to be difficult, but it's not like that.
So the question that I have, and that I'm sure other people watching this, is how do you know? How do you know if you're in that gap or if this is it?
That's a very good question, and I've been asked this question many times. When people read the book, or when I work with them and I mention the word waiting room and the place between two lives, the people who are in there know it immediately. Immediately, people go, oh my God, that's where I am, and they cry. So far, I have never met anyone who said, I don't know what that is. The response has been like that. If it doesn't speak to them, if it doesn't feel like anything, then maybe their life is exactly as it should be, and they are in the second chapter, second first. But when they realize what I've told them, and that there's a place that it looks like this, and I talk about the waiting room a lot. I talk about how cozy and comfortable it is, and you have a flat screen TV and a couch, and it's amazing, metaphorically speaking, and maybe realistically so too. But it's a place that was difficult at first to be there, but we make it our home, and we stay there. And I've been in the waiting room thinking that the corporate world and surviving after my husband died and not thriving was the way it was supposed to be. But we're not supposed to just survive. I really don't think so.
So what are we supposed to do?
We're supposed to have adventures and thrive. And it's okay to go back to the waiting room for a rest. I do. I need to rest. But as long as we know where the keys are and we can open the door and re-enter. We're going to re-enter many times. I'm not saying people to re-enter and stay in their amazing life every day. It's actually, if I was living the life of my dreams all 24/7, I think I would be exhausted, Jonathan. I would be too tired. Too much fun. I can't take it. But I think that as long as every day we have a happy moment, a moment where we feel fulfilled, acknowledged and validated, the number one thing that I have discovered is that people are not validated and acknowledged, and that creates bitterness, resistance to everything, unhappiness, anger. Everything comes from that. And they stay in that waiting room because they don't feel understood by the world. They're not going to go out.
I mean, what resonates with me about this so much, and my guess is people who will be sharing this conversation, is that you're talking about it in the context of deep personal loss of life and recovering from that. But that same emotion, that same experience, that same, not the sense necessarily of having lost somebody that you cared so deeply about, but just that same sense of being in the waiting room, that same sense of I'm not flourishing and I'm not validated, follows a lot of people around for large chunks of their life.
And it's when I wrote this book, there is one chapter about my life, so people know who I am, and that's it. That's it. I did not want to write a memoir. I have read so many memoirs, and I connected with the people who wrote their stories. But then, what am I to do in my own life? How am I supposed to have this beautiful life? So the book is about stepping outside of the waiting room and into the life that you want. And I really believe that loss is experienced by every single person, and it doesn't look like a death. It looks like rejection. It looks like abandonment. It looks like my father didn't call me. It looks like my boyfriend cheated on me. It looks like my boss ignored me. That's what loss looks like. And when I have someone people come and tell me, oh, I've never experienced loss, I tell them, are you 1 year old? If you're over 1, you have experienced loss many times over. And loss is an inhuman experience happening in a human body. And what happens next is really evolutionary if we use it to re-enter.
So let's share some of the ideas. How do we use it to re-enter?
So the reentry process is made up of 5 steps. And without the first step, I couldn't get people to re-enter. And I had to add it because I wanted everyone to move forward so fast. I wanted everyone to do this. And people kept having these trance moments. Like we would sit and they would go into their world of, oh, you know what happened to me? And this happened and this loss and my father and my mother and my sister and they did this to me and that. But they were not just reflecting on their story, which is a very healing experience. It's one thing to reflect on something, another thing to time travel and go to that place without really being present. So when I saw that over and over again, I realized that they needed something else. So I created something called the Grief Cleanse, the validation and acknowledgement exercises, and I will not move people forward unless they go through those steps. So the very first thing is that people need to get real about where they are in their life, what it is that they're grieving. People buy my book for one loss, they read it, and they realize it was something completely different that kept them stuck. Because the invisible losses are the ones we don't talk about. The visible losses, grief can be very loud. If I lose my husband, hey, I get a lot of sympathy from the world for having gone through something so terrible. But if you get divorced because your husband cheated on you, it's something you don't talk about. Now those people are in the gap and in the waiting room without validation and acknowledgement, and they grieve forever and they die like this, Jonathan. That's why I wrote the book.
So you start out with this initial process to pull them out of that trance.
Yes, to put them out of the trance and out of the confusion of what it is that they're feeling, because they haven't expressed their feelings. They haven't been witnessed. There has been no mirrors. Nobody has seen inside of them. Nothing. So, and that's a very tough first step. And I have all these people reading the book right now, and they're saying they're angry, they're crying more, they're feeling terrible in that moment. But that's the only way through.
So, I mean, and this is so interesting to me, because we're both authors, right?
Yes.
When you write a book which is designed to guide people through a process that you've spent a lot of time guiding people through a process personally, face to face.
Yes.
I guess one of the challenges is, and this is something I struggle with when I write, is you know that no matter what we put in print, no matter how good a writer you are, no matter how much you distill your process, it's never going to be the same as being in a room with somebody or getting somebody in a room with other people who can help process. That's always one of the struggles that I have when I write stuff like this, and it just kind of spoke to me really loudly when you were sharing that, because you're somebody who's gifted at really being in front of somebody. Yeah. And I wonder whether, as a writer, because we have a lot of writers, and whether it's sort of like you were exploring this question of how do I work with that? And
when I was writing the book, and I knew I wasn't going to be with the people when they were going through it, and I said, how am I going to get them to experience reentry? So at first, when the book first came out, I got about 350 people to get into a book club with me, so make sure that they get through, because I'm still finding it hard to let it all go and trust that it's going to be okay. So they're all going through it with me, and then the rest of the world is going through it alone. I really believe as long as the book allows for the person to discover the loss they haven't grieved, find themselves in which location in their life they're in. If they're in the gap, let's find our way out. And I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and this woman came to me and said, just the fact that I realized I was in the waiting room, it was worth it. Yeah. And I've heard that, in 1 week, people are meeting them, telling me that, if nothing else, me putting words in things that I couldn't articulate is priceless. So, and the other thing that I want this book to do is change the conversation around grief and loss. I want to get grief on the center stage. I mean, politicians, government, non-profits, for-profits, big companies, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to get them all to participate and not wake them up, but make them realize that their life experiences are influencing their work, their personal life, and everything they're going to do.
So how do you do that? And here's another. We have a lot of similarities.
Yes, I know.
So my last book was on uncertainty, but fundamentally it was how embracing, framing it as this extraordinary window where uncertainty is a window for possibility, and I speak too. Yes. And there was one moment where I was being considered for a very large thing in a large corporation, and they came back to me and said, the chief marketing officer basically just rejected it at the last minute because he felt like the topic of uncertainty was a downer. So I think to myself, and there are plenty of other people who got it. And but when I think about it, and I agree, I think if you could actually get people exploring this grief, you could have so many unlock moments for so many people. And on an organizational level, if they're looking even just for a bottom line reason to have this conversation, if you unlock that in so many people and they start to become validated and activated, it affects the bottom line of an organization in a profound way. But still, how do you go?
How do you
say, we're going to talk about grief?
Yes, and so I tell them, I'm not here to teach you how to grieve. I'm here to help you come back to life. And I call myself a life strategist after loss. And people like to call me a grief expert, and that's okay. But it's not easy, Jonathan, to open those doors. And they stay closed. And I keep knocking. And I will never stop, and there are no guarantees. But I really believe if I get a moment with those people, I will shake the ground they're standing on, and I will remind them who they are, the kind of human species that we are, and why we experience what we experience, and what we can do about it, and with it, what we can do with this experience. There is a chapter in my book that I activate your thriver in there. So I'm there to activate the thrivers within them. And there's another chapter that activate the watcher. There's a part of us, inside of us, that is our intuition, is everything that we know. That we know so many things that we just never ask ourselves those questions. So I activate your intuition, activate your soul. I mean, this is a crazy book, and when I wrote it, I said, they're either going to think I'm a genius or they're going to think I'm completely crazy. And I was willing to take that chance. So I split people in three different selves and have fun with them, and then we get to the other side. So if they let me in, it's gonna be crazy. But and if they say no, and I've been rejected so many times, that's okay too. I think it's worth it. And one day someone, after us, Jonathan, will knock on the door and the door will open easier. And it would have been because of us. And I'm good with that.
You mentioned there are 4 other phases.
Yes, they are. So
just to not leave people hanging.
Yes, no.
You get one. But
yes, and the first one is the toughest thing, and the second one is not easy because it's action. I always say time does not heal all wounds, action does. So people who want to be healed, they go and wait, and they wait for time to heal them. People told me this, Christina, it's going to take time. You just have to wait it out. And I'm like, I'm in a lot of pain right now, and what you're telling me is not helping me. I was angry. It's not helping me. Get me out of this pain. And I didn't want to take any pills. And that's kind of, controversial, and I understand, but I chose to know how I'm feeling, and I didn't take anything. And I totally respect other people who do, completely. So plugging into life at 5%, only 5%. And the reason for that is that I had clients who were trying so hard to make these big goals come true, and so our brain, our fear center gets activated when we jump too high, and then we get so scared that we come back to the waiting room. Not only come back, we lock the doors, we close the windows, we get under the covers, and we hide for longer periods of time. So I saw that happening, and I said, okay, I can't get people to re-enter like this. So I took everything back, and I said, give me 5%. What does 5% look like? Change your hair color, paint this wall, go to work a different way. And then the next day I want you to plug in again at 5%. So we didn't activate the fear center like this. We didn't get the brain to say, what are you doing? You're trying to get me out of my routine. I'm asleep. You're trying to wake me up. So we're sneaking out of the waiting room and into life at 5%. And then one day people turn around and say, oh, wow, look where I am. They do get rejected. It is not easy. They get slammed. The doors close on their face. But they're really quiet, slams. They're quiet hurts. They're
5% slams instead
there
of 50%
you go.
slams, right?
So that's how I got myself back, and how I helped so many other people get back. And that's number 2, plugging in. Just plug in every day, and dream, act every day, repeat. Dream, act, repeat.
In little pieces.
Yes, very little pieces. And to get to where I am today has been very, very small. And that's why I have a lot of patience. I'm like, okay, this is not happening today. I'm sure it will happen tomorrow, because I have seen so many amazing things happening because of the way I've been slowly. I mean, I wrote to you remember, slowly,
yeah.
Slowly. Nothing too exciting, just keep going forward. And I had never considered giving up. Yes, there were tough moments when it is hard. I'm not saying it's easy, and I will not forget the tough moments, but I also knew it was worth it, and I kept going forward. So that's step number 2.
Okay.
So number 3 is shift and changing your thoughts, but not like The Secret or, I really believe there's a real estate inside of us that we're repeating the grief. And I really believe we're not mourning, we're actually repeating the loss. And we need to stop the repetition, and we need to stop the infinite loop. We keep going around, reliving, re-identifying with that loss. We need to exit that. And when we exit, and after we plug in and we do all the things that I talked about, we actually discover who we are now. And most people keep trying on the same clothes and they don't fit, and they keep trying. And I'm like, stop trying this. It's not gonna work out. So when people discover who they are, then they can re-enter.
So is that number 4?
Discovery is number 4, and re-entry is number 5. And that's when we set bigger goals for the first time. So one day I'm gonna teach all the coaches how to not just come up with goals as soon as they meet the person. Let's do the re-entry first.
I'm kind of curious about the language re-enter also, because it's almost like the suffering is something that happens outside of life and you come back to life, which is interesting because it's one of the traditions that I sort of explored in Buddhism, which would essentially say that is life.
Actually, I've never thought of it this way before. You have a really good point. I think when we're suffering, we're shutting down life. If one day we're able to dance with grief and life together, then that would be the really coolest thing in the world. But as human beings, we really find it hard to laugh and cry at the same time.
Agreed.
So
you and I could jam on this for a long
forever.
time.
Yes.
Lovely conversation, so fascinating. So the name of this project is The Good Life Project.
Yes.
So when I offer that term out to you, to live a good life, what comes up?
To be present, to know that the small things are the big things, to laugh with my girls, to see as many sunrises as possible, to fall in love with many people. I love people. To have amazing conversations like this, to not be afraid, to know that everything is going to be okay, because it is. Because one day we're all going to expire and move on to something else. And to know that everything is possible because I've been through the unimaginable. I really believe that it is. For everyone, not just me. And thank you.
Thank you. So my guest today has been Christina Rasmussen, the author of Second Firsts. I'm Jonathan Field, signing off for Good Life Project.